So for more on the president's Oval Office address and the ongoing border wall funding negotiations, let's bring in Leslie Sanchez and Antjuan Seawright. Leslie is a CBS News contributor and Republican strategist, and Antjuan is a Democratic strategist. Thank you so much for...
Hi guys. What's up?
Okay, so, you know, all anyone wants to know is when is this government shutdown thing going to end? Based on what you heard last night, does it seem like it's going to end anytime soon?
Not anytime soon.
Yeah.
And that's probably the disheartening part, especially for federal workers. I think going into this, there was a lot more of an idea that there was going to be conciliatory language, sympathy that Antjuan had talked about a lot last night for the federal workers. But one thing to keep in mind, if you go to the heartland of America, we call the flyover states and the base there, there's a very different observation of what people think federal government workers are. There is this false mischaracterization of like the bloat of the bigger government.
Right.
So there is unions. There's not as much sympathy as you have inside the Beltway, and that is a drumbeat that the president is listening to. So I think when we're characterizing this, that's what we really should keep in mind. It's a different debate on a different frequency for different people.
But what about the Democratic response, Antjuan?
I thought it was great. I thought it was one band, one sound, where Democrats need to be on this. I think that the bottom line is the Trump shutdown will end when the legislative branch will do their sworn duty and step up to the plate and ignore the executive branch and this petty request about a campaign promise of a wall. The Republicans, I think, in the Senate, you'll start to see them peel off one by one. We now have heard of 4 who will potentially vote for the same resolution they voted for before the break to reopen the government, and then let's go from there. The House Democrats are going to continue to apply political pressure next week by one, putting bills on the floor to say, let's open up these agencies. It's going to get harder and harder for even House Republicans to say no, 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 no. And I think that will come to some sort of legislative resolution to reopen the government, and then I think you'll see negotiations.
I do think, though, that it's a good point that both of you are making. And so, Leslie, what about what Antjuan is saying? Look, I mean, I get that some folks may think that it's the bloat of Washington, D.C., but the reality is it's FDA, for example. I've seen reports of people not able to get medicine for young children because of clinical trials that have been halted because of the FDA. It's the TSA agents who are supposedly there to protect us and put us through the misery of going through security checks at the airport because they want to keep us safe. They're not able to get paid. I get it. There's some people who think, well, it's just people that work in Washington and the Beltway, but this affects all Americans.
Others are going to start to feel it.
That's really an argument that I think a lot of Republicans have been trying to make too, that we all feel it's America's problem. It's not pitting one group against the other. There's 2 different things here, right? The optics of that, the pain and feeling the heat of that, but who's going to blink first? And now when you have an unorthodox president who is committed to the idea of the wall, what gets lost in this? The president 7 times repeated he wanted 2,000 miles of border wall. Right now we're talking about, he always said you wouldn't have just a little wall, people would go around, but now it looks like the concession might be some wall. There's an agreement on both sides of the aisle that there needs to be that type of fencing or such in maybe urban areas or areas where those municipalities are asking for it. So if they can come to agreement on that, on again, comprehensive reform. You're hearing conservatives now say, we'll give you border for DACA. We've never heard conservatives talking about something like that, or even legalization. So I'm saying we're making more progress on this than most people think, but who's going to blink first?
So, Antjuan, you're nodding.
No, I was agreeing with you, but the other part was I think you'll see Democrats not change their posture about we're for border security, and that's been pretty evident in votes that have been taken very much so. So the president has moved away from the wall, build the wall that Mexico was going to pay for, and now he's starting to sing some of the similar tunes you're hearing from Democrats of we want border security, and now he's trying to pit this argument that Democrats are not for border security, which is just another alternative fact like most of the things he talked about last night. So what I think you're going to see is the president's going to get some border security money, like the $1.6 billion he received in the last continuing resolution. By the way, he's only spent less than 10% of. He's going to get some border security money, but it will not be wall funding. And I think Republicans will have no choice because the 2020 elections are right around the corner.
The other thing that I heard in that speech, Antjuan, and Leslie, you can weigh in on this too, because we've talked about how there are a significant numbers of Latinos in this country who support the president, even with some of the rhetoric that he uses. But, you know, the president, again, using some of the language that is divisive in trying to engage with African Americans and suggesting that people that are coming from our southern neighbors are somehow a threat to them, in addition to the most graphic descriptions of murders that I've ever heard a president ever use, you know, especially from the Oval Office, about dismemberments and, you know, all sorts of, you know, gruesome things. What did you make of that aspect of the speech?
Well, that wasn't a speech to me. That was a campaign rally just done from the Oval Office. Many of the things we heard from the president last night was many of the things we heard from him during the course of the campaign trail. So it was just a rehearse. The fact of the matter is, I watched the 2006 address, I think, of President Bush, and he talked about how we're a nation of immigrants. And these people are not coming to this country because they want to come here and rape and kill and do the things the president wants. They're coming because they want a better quality life. And they want to enjoy this thing that we enjoy called the American franchise. Leslie, you would not put a child on your back and walk 2,000 miles because you want to come here and do all the things that sometimes the president sends a message. You want to come here because you want that child's quality of life to be better than yours, and I think that's what gets lost in all of this.
So I like hearing the Democrats talk about the Bush message, you know, because I was there. We wrote that message.
I frequently talk about Ronald Reagan's message, which he's the gold standard of Republicans in this country. And if you go back and you listen to President Reagan talking about immigration, illegal immigration in this country, it sounds light years away from how you hear Republicans talking about it today.
George H.W. Bush, John McCain, Mitt Romney, Senator K. Bailey Hutchinson, I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
And an earlier incarnation of Lindsey Graham. Not this incarnation.
What day? He's on like 12.0 right now.
I want to ask you to react to Antjuan's sort of prediction of how things could unfold, that the president will eventually have to accept money for border security, which is basically a bipartisan thing, excuse me, and sort of give up on the wall, right? But I want to ask you, how do you think his base would react to that? Right. We spoke to Major Garrett earlier today, and he sort of played out a scenario where, you know, if the president doesn't get the money for the wall, that's okay, because in that loss there'll be a win come 2020, because he can say, look, I did everything I could, and those Democrats wouldn't let me.
I think Major Garrett is 100% right. That's where this lens needs to go. This will be a detonation issue. There are certain issues like that for Republicans who are already saying immigration is top, even above health care, especially in some of the battleground states. This becomes the rallying cry. This is a 2020 issue without a doubt. And so that's one scenario. The other scenario, I do not believe the president's going to blink. He will actually, I believe the Democrats could be in a foxhole they do not know they're in yet.
Right.
And when they come out and say, okay, we're going to give you some border security, some of this kind of thing, the president's right there saying, okay, we do it. He is not going to move or budge on the issue of one appropriation per agency.
Except that
it felt like after those two speeches, yes, I felt like both groups had painted themselves into a corner, basically saying we're not moving on this border wall.
So the next step of that escalation, TSA decides not to show up for work. It starts to have these economic ramifications that Vlad's talking about, brings these parties to the table, and there's going to have to be a concession on both parts. Republicans are saying the Democrats are for open borders, full amnesty. We are for securing the border, and that's really where the detail is in that language. As long as you paint that broader stroke of Democrats not looking for security, which is actually quite genius in the sense of we went from talking about a 2,000-mile wall to now the president's trying to say, no, you're not for security.
Except that the Democrats offered $1.3 billion in funding
but that's
for border security. I know, but they offered it.
It's also only genius if his base is buying what he's selling. But, you know, we saw when he seemed to sort of warm to the idea of funding the government, but not the wall, and the pushback that he got from conservative media, he sort of scurried right back to wall, you know?
Sorry, go ahead, Antjuan.
There's a difference between the legislative branch and the executive branch, and you're going to see the legislative branch realize, you know what, we have to do what we need to do for our own politics, let the president's chips fall where they may, and we'll figure out, because you and I, we all know how the issues go. It will be on to something else as soon as this crisis ends. And so I think the legislative branch understands that.
I love having you guys here. Antjuan, it's great meeting you. I don't think we've ever sat down at the table together, but I miss the working nights because we used to have these like long discussions about what's happening in our country. Always great insight from you, Leslie. Antjuan, thank you very much for stopping by. We appreciate it.
Thank you.